Being a fan of the series, naturally, I had to get my hands on this fated game. It was a combination of the intense marketing, the shitstorm of hype online, and the reactions to a, certain character that really cued me in on the kind of experience that this game would bring me. And while it was an experience, I do have to say that after beating it for the first time, I was left with mixed feelings. Hell, even before then, after I'd beaten the castle, I was worried that the game had already peaked, and to my dismay, it had. There were so many odd design choices in this game that led me to want to make this video. Each area is well crafted and looks phenomenal, but feels like its own separate game. It's not very consistent with its themes. It's almost as if Capcom truly didn't know what type of game they wanted Resident Evil Village to be. A survival horror game, or a thriller action game, or just plain action? Well, I don't know, because it's all of those things. Now, I get that games only using one theme can end up feeling stale, but when you throw a bunch of half-baked ones into a mixer, it can easily mess up the final product. There were times where the game started to feel really solid, but that feeling would often come to an abrupt end thanks to either some odd mechanical choice or a cringy Ethan line.
I'm sick of bugs.
And that's not even the worst of the writing. Resident Evil Village is a good game, don't get me wrong, but it has a lot of glaring issues. From odd character and writing choices, to actual game length, and even the amount of direction the game tries to go, I can't help but feel disappointed after how Capcom nailed survival horror in Resident Evil 7. Resident Evil 7 left an amazing impression on me. It took the game back to the survival horror themes that the series had originally started off with. That's the main reason why Village had me confused. It seemed like they nailed the formula, and along with that, created a super unique and enthralling environment. A village overrun by supernatural beings. It feels like they could have made a fantastic horror game, building off the foundation of its immediate predecessor, or that they could have gone full Resident Evil 4 and made a goofy but memorable action game. So I don't understand why this game has such a huge identity crisis as to what it wants to be. I get it, this series has had many tonal changes, but it's still an odd choice to swap frequently throughout the game. The combat doesn't really help with the design either. It's as bare bones as it comes. Simple grinding mechanics combined with shooting. This worked in the last game and would have definitely worked again if the game had not changed its enemy design so drastically. These enemies are very engaging and creative, and a lot of them have diverse movesets that expand on the mold monsters from RE7. The problem is, the combat didn't evolve with the enemy design, shining a spotlight on how lacking the simple combat system really is. Enemies regularly eat bullets, and only occasionally does satisfying feedback happen, like when their head pops from a headshot. Other than that, it's not really all that responsive or, well, like I said, satisfying. I just realized while writing this script that I'm being pretty negative, so let's talk about something good. The actual guns. The way that it works is that the pistol and shotgun have 3 different versions throughout the game, the third tier ones obviously being the best. The unique weapons are the Magnum Wolfsbane, grenade launcher, and rifle. There's more than that, but you have to unlock them after your first playthrough, so it doesn't count. Looking at you, Burial Blade. But just know, they are fun to mess around with. The Magnum is really strong and fun to shoot. You really feel the power behind each shot. With the grenade launcher, it's fun to blow up enemies or blind them with the flashbangs. I will say that the game does not communicate well on how to change the different rounds you use, but I'll chalk that up to user error. The rifle is fun because you can quickscope enemies to get quick damage off, and it is a godsend in Mercenaries mode. Speaking of Mercenary mode, the game mode is rather disappointing. It feels really half-assed in comparison to previous games, leading back to the problem I outlined with the combat system. The only way to really get a high rank is to run around with the rifle and quickscope. I never finished it due to my loss of interest in it, and it's the only thing left for me to 100% the game. I don't think I ever will. It was just too bland. And even in the regular story mode, the lack of enemy variety was very disappointing. I know I said earlier that the enemy design is better, but that's just it. The design is better. The variety, on the other hand, instead of having the basic Lycans only having 3 different looks, they could have gone crazy and helped build on the immersion of the game. Giving the enemies different skins based on which area of the game you are in could have been a great choice. This has been an issue that has plagued the series since the beginning. Also, I did hint at this before, but it's obvious that this game is a love letter to RE4. The biggest piece of evidence of this was bringing back the attaché case. It's great, but on PC, the controls for sorting it out are honestly very backwards. I never got used to it, and fumbled around in it every single time. Same with a lot of controls in this game, but again, it could be because of the conditioning from other games. but F as the action key? Really? I know, key binding is a thing, so this is a small complaint, but man, I really can't help but be negative, so let's try to change the tone. Hey, just like the game does. This game is absolutely beautiful. The RE engine never ceases to amaze me. The past few games using it have truly felt next gen. The castle alone has so much detail and I love it. I'm a real sucker for this kind of aesthetic. The village has this eerie air about it when searching around. Going to House Beneviento, seeing the distant mountains, perfection. The factory has an amazing industrial feeling to it. This huge sprawling underground bunker mass producing Heisenberg's metal army. And you can see them all on the assembly line, which is a great detail that I love. The game definitely sets itself apart from others with all these tiny details. It's not only the graphics that are stunning, the sound design is top notch as well. So many great ambient noises to add to the horror of the game. Capcom has gotten really good at setting up scares with just sound. The second area alone had such an amazing atmosphere, with the creepy noises and the sounds the monster of the area makes. The gameplay and overall design was fun and charming, but with a few more changes, could have been way better. Ethan has a real tough go of it. The game could have easily been called Resident Evil Ethan's Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day, and it would still have the same effect. It seems like Capcom really has something out for Ethan. It feels as if in every area, something absolutely insane happens to him. This entire game is just Ethan torture porn. In the first 20 minutes of the game, he loses 2 of his fingers. Then in the next area, he gets it even worse. His hand gets chopped off, he has to tear his hands through hooks, he gets a sickle all the way through his leg. They definitely elicited the response they were trying to get from me. It was honestly gross. Hell, there's so much Ethan pain that whole compilations and even some subreddits have been made. I mean, just look. This video that catalogs all of Ethan's cutscene injuries is nearly 10 minutes long. Fuck's sake. This also shows how, in all of these encounters, Ethan is a complete amateur. It's as if he never went to the Baker house and killed dozens of mold monsters. Right away, this was one of my biggest gripes with the game. Okay, I get it. When weird things happen, you're not going to be able to react properly just because of some past traumatic events. But that doesn't matter because it's explained in the beginning cutscene that Ethan has received military training since the last game. This had me confused. Did Ethan just forget everything? There's no sign of military experience or any kind of experience really, besides being able to shoot a gun. This was disappointing in its own right, as I would have liked to see a more proficient or capable Ethan after his encounters in RE7, but as he is now, he's just a wimpier version of Leon. I know no one could ever stack up to Leon, the absolute Chad that he is, but Ethan acts super oblivious, constantly. He says a lot of dumb shit throughout the game, and it's in such stark contrast to what we saw with Ethan at the end of Resident Evil 7. It's honestly very infuriating playing as a character with room temperature IQ, but whatever. I'll cut him some slack since he's had a chill 3 years and just had his daughter taken from him. Maybe he's gotten soft, who knows. Maybe he spent all his training time growing his third arm so he could switch weapons faster. But alongside Ethan, there are a few returning characters and a bunch of new ones. Chris, by far, being the most prolific side character returning to the spotlight. Capcom has this weird thing where they make Chris out to be the antagonist of the game from the start. Of course, it's how they want to tell the story, but it seems out of character for Chris to leave Ethan in the dark after forming a relationship from the events of the last game. Also, he's had facial surgery since the last game. He is still the boulder punching badass that he's always been and is moving up in the world. He's leading his own strike team and has this whole operation under his command. But this commander and tactical expert couldn't even take 5 seconds to explain to Ethan why he shot his not wife. Instead, he takes his baby and knocks him out. I feel like this is a pretty big deal since it's glaringly obvious Capcom only did this to set up an epic twist later. All it would take is, hey, sorry we shot your wife, but she isn't your wife, and you need to come with us, please, Ethan, my pal, my buddy. They could have done this and just had Ethan freak out, so they had to knock him out anyway. But as it stands right now, it's a shitty cover up for an even shittier twist. Still though, he's a Chad. The Duke is a very charismatic guy who is also rather thick. He's mysterious and knows a lot of information without giving anything out about himself. The reason for that being, well, he doesn't even know what he is. I honestly loved every interaction I had with him. He is a means to replace the antique coin system from the past game and become the role of the merchant, similar to RE4. It's great because he even has an Easter egg where he mentions the merchant from RE4 saying, "What are you buying?" and then says that it was a catchphrase of an old friend of his. I'm not going to be the neckbeard who dives into the implications of a harmless little line, it's just a fun nod to RE4. Mia was more of a side character than from the last game, which is odd since she's an integral part of Ethan's life. She only shows up at the beginning and end of the game and doesn't serve a real purpose. I wish she had a bigger part in all of this. The antagonists of the game are the four lords and Mother Miranda. Starting off with the first lord, who I'm sure I don't need to mention by name, she resides in the castle. She is very reminiscent of a vampire, but that's not entirely what she is. She needs to consume human blood to keep her regenerative power in good shape, but that's where the similarities end. This regeneration also led to her becoming rather large. She lives in a castle that really brings the game back to how RE1 was, a big labyrinth. I loved running around trying to solve puzzles and finding items to continue searching for Rose. There was no waste space whatsoever and it was amazing. The second Lord, Donna, is, well, not really fleshed out at all. We just know that she can control her puppet and make people hallucinate using some flowers or something. The house itself is very creepy and gives off the same vibes as PT did, RIP. There was one puzzle that was well made, but then as soon as it started to get amazing, it just abruptly ended. After this, there's a disappointing boss fight that's literally just hide and go seek. This area is really short, like 15 minutes kind of short. Overall, it's sad to see this area not as defined and enthralling as the first one. The third Lord, Moreau, was an interesting take on character design. He devoted his entire life to Mother Miranda and wants to be noticed. The reservoir is where he resides and once again is well crafted and fun to play, but rather short and limited to just being chased around. It's a cool set piece being chased by a huge fish that swears up and down that he's the best. The boss fight is a step up, but it was literally just Monster Hunter with guns. I guess that could be said about Lady D as well, but this arena was much more open. This area was a bit better than the Flesh Baby zone, but still a tad short, almost like they prioritized working on the first and final zones. Speaking of, the final lord is definitely the best one. Heisenberg looks like Dante from Devil May Cry if he was a Bloodborne character who spent all his insight on the Father Gascoigne set. He's basically Magneto with his powers. He was definitely the saving grace for this game because at this point I wasn't too fond of how the last two areas turned out. His whole personality is wanting to become the strongest and wants to kill Miranda. He feels humiliated having to work under her for decades. As stated previously, his factory is amazing. The level and depth and detail to it are great. I will say that all the backtracking isn't as fun as it was in the castle. The whole floors following the same path wasn't really engaging. The enemy design in this level is amazing. Throughout the factory you can find notes on how Heisenberg is trying to upgrade his soldats. And all of these notes are found before the initial encounter, so it feels organic in how to deal with them. The visual cues help too. The mini-boss of this area is fun too. His name is Sturm and he is a good boy. Mechanically the fight is very basic and he just runs around and you shoot him in the butt. It's his design and lore that really sets him apart from the rest. Heisenberg attempted to strap a propeller engine on a soldat and he chopped off his own arms by accident with the blades. This is like Silent Hill level stuff and I love it. At the end of the factory, before going to take out the mutated Heisenberg, Ethan finds Chris repairing a battle bot that is apparently a direct counter to Heisenberg. This feels like a huge convenience because why would he just have that laying around, but oh well. This fight is a huge shift from what's happened previously. It honestly doesn't even feel like a Resident Evil game at this point. It's just Gurren Lagann. It was fun, don't get me wrong, it was just out of place. The best part would definitely be the line about Chris, the Chad. It's nice that they care enough to reference their old games. Mother Miranda was an interesting character and is pretty much the cause of everything. Her fight was fun and more back to how fights are normally. No crazy mech action. Nothing really much else to say about her, as she comes into play so late in the story.
Why the hell didn't you realize Rose is my goddamn kid, not yours?
The game definitely hooked me. It has such amazing survival horror in the beginning and had me asking questions left and right. But getting further in, the constant shift in tones really started to grate on me. Never to the point where I wanted to stop playing, but there was still a disconnect. As stated prior, each game in the series has had a new interesting take on how the Resident Evil series should play. The biggest cases being from 3 moving all the way to 7. Each game could be put in a different genre altogether. Of course there's nothing wrong with this. but having all these types of changes in the middle of a single game just kills the flow. Overall, the story is just another wacky Resident Evil game, meaning the story really isn't meant to be taken seriously, which, again, is totally fine. The game is literally just supernatural beings torturing a poor man and his daughter. It's more of an avenue for killing creepy zombie monster things, and that's why it's important to have fluid and cohesive gameplay themes. Other games had one feel and stuck to it almost completely. After the crazy bombastic opening, Ethan is left all alone searching for his daughter in the village. It has this amazing spooky feeling to it. It's eerie, it's unnerving, it's what Resident Evil does best. Once reaching the castle, it returns to the nice survival horror that the earlier entries in the series are known for, which I could never get enough of. The first major tonal shift would be the second area, House Beneviento. They take away your weapons and you solve a puzzle while chased around by a giant flesh baby. So there's really no survival aspect because you just run or die. You don't need to collect any resources or anything. You enter and leave in the same position besides plot progression. This feels weird for a game about conserving ammo and getting more cool items and upgrades. The Reservoir is the exact opposite of this. It eliminates all horror elements and is pure fast-paced action. This whole area is just a way to drain ammo. I mean, the boss fight could be construed as scary, seeing as Moreau is creepy looking, but that's as far as it goes. Moving into the Stronghold, it's used more of a segue to take the fast-paced action and scale it down by clearing out the ruins. Going to Heisenberg's factory, it slows down the pacing even more. It goes back to the feel of the castle and is a much needed change. Moving on to the ridiculous Heisenberg boss fight, it's incredibly out of place, to then be launched into Chris's segment with no buffer of any kind. It's just Call of Duty at this point. Now I can understand this segment is to decompress and just let loose into enemies that have been stressing you out throughout the game, but after laying into enemies for a while, it gets kind of mindless. There is a way to do these powerful character segments right, and that's one thing I really liked about Cyberpunk 2077, but that's a whole different can of worms that I dare not open right now. The end boss fight with the upgraded Hammer Boy definitely drags on, and finally after that it's another boss fight but for Ethan against Mother Miranda, which is definitely a nice moment, where two parents are fighting for the children, one for them to stay alive and the other to bring them back. In total, there were 8 different themes used throughout the game. As stated earlier in the video, this is totally fine on paper, but in practice is very jarring.
Don't touch that down, we're just getting started. And her big dump truck ass!
Resident Evil Village is probably going to be my favorite game this year. I know it might seem like I wasn't too big a fan of the game, but I was. I enjoyed playing it so much I sunk 25 or so hours into doing 5 different playthroughs. It was just a disappointing experience. If you haven't played the game yet, don't let me sway you in any way to not get to try it out. By all means, go and consume. It just could have been a way better experience had they stuck to what they created and cultivated with Resident Evil 7. The game has glaring problems that I just cannot look past, and unfortunately that left me a little disappointed. In the end, I do think it's worth playing. There are plenty of high points and some lows that I definitely think you can draw your own conclusions on. As for me, I'll be waiting patiently for the inevitable DLC to come later in the year. Thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to subscribe and leave feedback in the comments. I love feedback and want to improve in any way that I can, so don't hesitate to share your thoughts. Thank you to Mikey, Rom, and Hayden, and especially Rainey, who is so smart and so cool and strong and wait a minute, who wrote this shit? You all helped tremendously in this whole process, and it is very much appreciated.
What a thrill, with darkness and silence through the night. What a thrill.